Just an easy thing to go online and go fetch so that it doesn't make anyone's life harder than it needs to be. So today we are talking about the Safavids. Specifically, we are going to be looking into their interactions and changes during the sort of Renaissance period. So basically, while Renaissance is going on, this is what's happening in Persia. Which, how many of you guys have ever heard of Persia? What have you guys? Where have you heard that term before? Where have you heard of Persia before? I've heard of it, but don't know where. Okay. Fair enough. Persia is one of those things that gets thrown around to basically mean some Middle Eastern place, I find. Most of the time when we hear Persia, it's kind of done in a generic sort of way and not really explained in any very realistic sort of way. So where is it? What are we talking about? It's modern-day Iran. Specifically, Persia is from the southern part of Iran. A province called the Fars province. So people from the Fars province are Farsian. Guess what language they speak from there? Farsi. F-A-R-S-I. In fact, what's kind of interesting is when the Muslims took over this area of the world, the main state religion was Zoroastrianism. So the folks that fled, Zoroastrians who came this way from the Muslims ended up settling in India. So if you look at northwestern India, they speak Farsi there. It's one of the main languages. So that's kind of this movement in the geography that we're not really talking about, but it's kind of this movement. So anyhow, let's talk about what's happening in Persia and the Safavids, things like that. The first Safavid Shah, which means king, by the way, Shah means king, was a dude named Ismail. Now, some of these names might sound familiar. Ismail equals Ishmael. It's a biblical name. Mahmud is Muhammad, as in the founder of the religion of Islam. And we also had Suleiman. And you guess what that might be? Solomon, yes. There's versions of all these different biblical names, from Moses to David. That's one of the important things to understand about the religion of Islam. They see Muslims see themselves as a continuation of the story of God. So basically, Judaism was story part one. And essentially, God came to the Jews and said, these are my rules, and the Jews screwed it up. So he had to come back again and send a representative, another major prophet, Jesus Christ, who was, again, here's the story of God, and here's what you need to do, and they said the Christians screwed it up. Note that in Islam, Christ is a prophet, not the Son of God. So they don't buy into the whole Savior aspect of it. They do see him as an important person. So finally, Muhammad, the prophet, got the message correct because basically God had Gabriel flat out dictate the Quran to him, and they spread the religion. So this means that in Islam, anyone who is a person of the book or a brother of the book is protected. So that means that Muslims cannot harm Christians or Jews or force them into conversion. How did that happen? There's this whole Crusades thing. For goodness sakes, we're about to talk about a war between two different Muslim kingdoms. So how is this possible? If Islam states that you cannot harm someone who is part of the faith, then how do they do it anyways? And that's because one of the things we have to understand is religion and politics are tied together in a very, very tight way in the Middle East. Often when we see conflict in the name of religion, it's actually about politics. The reason behind that is basically to still appear to be a good Muslim. According to Islam, you cannot engage in revolution against a Muslim king. They are a true Muslim, and you can't revolt against them because then you're fighting against God. You see, the idea in Islam is that the world is really broken up into two different parts. Dar al-Islam, which is the abode of peace, where everybody is happy and great, and everyone's a Muslim. And Dar al-Harb, the abode of war, where people do not accept Islam, and the Ghazi have to go spread Islam, if necessary, by the point of the sword. Which is interesting because, again, you can't forcibly convert people. So it's really more about control. You can actually be part of Dar al-Islam and not be a Muslim. We talked about that with the Ottomans, how they had the Millet system, for instance. But anyhow, so Muslims are supposed to be, working together to bring about Dar al-Islam, but that means working with people you don't necessarily like, and that doesn't really happen. And so what happens instead is these little tribal differences and greater wars happen when someone accuses another Muslim of not being a true Muslim. So that's really the only wiggle room you can have. You basically call them a heretic. We had almost so much fun talking about heretics. And so what happens is you have different sects of Islam fighting it out that allegedly appear to be holy wars, but in reality are about politics. And that's kind of a big deal to understand. Whenever we study the Middle East and look at conflicts, understand even though it looks like this is religious conflict, it really has nothing to do with religion. For instance, look at ISIS. Allegedly, if they were law-abiding Muslims, they would not be doing half the things they did. There's literally a letter from the Prophet Muhammad stating that Christians should be protected, not, for instance, burned alive, which is what ISIS does. And so, we have this instance of kind of understanding this isn't about religion, this is something else entirely. And so, we turn to Ismail. He was a religious tyrant. Specifically, he really heavily suppressed the Sunnis. He was a Shiite. There are three sects of Islam. You guys know what three sects are? Sunni, Shiite, and Sufi. S-U-F-I. We're almost never going to encounter them. They're mystics. But these is Sufi, yeah. So the Ottomans are Sunni. They're Orthodox Muslims. Shiites are sort of like the Protestants of the Muslim world, to make it make sense to you. By oppressing the Sunni, this gave the Ottomans an excuse to invade. So sort of the same sort of thing we saw with Tamerlane, Amr Timur. We see the same thing happening with Islam in the Ottoman Empire. So they end up defeating the Safavids at the Battle of Calderon in 1514. And from that point on, the Safavid Empire is swearing fealty to the Ottomans. Now, the thing is, they're not actually part of the Ottoman Empire. They're still their own kingdom, but ostensibly they're sort of part of us. So that's something to understand what fealty means. It means that you're under the control of this other empire. So the next guy we're going to look at is going to be the king during the Golden Age. Now let's look at this, I forget the exact term for this picture, real quick, showing the Battle of Calderon. And one of the things you first see is, look at all these colors, yeah? There's just a lot going on, right? Now let me ask you a question. What's the purpose of a military uniform? Why do we dress soldiers in a uniform? Yeah, if you think about it, you're in a big battle. If you get separated from your guys, you'd be able to tell who your guys are, right? So it's a way of distinguishing between rival nations. By the way, you guys know another reason why we dress up soldiers in the uniform that's all the same? And give everyone the same haircut? To make everybody identical. One of the first things you learn in the military is that you're no longer an individual, you're part of a team. You're a cog in a machine. You're meant to work as a group, not as an individual. Because individuals are panicky, tend to make bad decisions. groups can work together in really harrowing circumstances. Let me tell you, there's nothing more harrowing than a battle. Whatever you think your life is, when literally your life is on the line and you can die at any second, you're going to be really hyped up on adrenaline and things like that. The last thing you're going to want to do is to actually fight, because that draws attention to you. And so one of the objectives is to take away this sense of identity and instead breed in reactions, train reactions to do things without even thinking, so that the troops do what they're supposed to do without even thinking about it. So that's another reason. But again, remember how we talked about the Janissaries? How they use music in psychological warfare? Does that ring a bell? You remember we talked about that? Let's talk about, battle and this sort of thing. Half of the battle is psychological. Really the only way that you win a battle is you make the other guy surrender first. Yeah? You think about it, the battle can go on for days and months and years and whatever if no one refuses to surrender. It's very rare that you have an instance where the battlefield, an army is wiped out, every person. During these types of wars with swords and shields and things like that, the enemy army would tend to run away after they lost something like 10% of their troops. So if you had 100 guys out there in the battlefield, once 10 died, the rest of the 90 are just running away. So if you can get them to run away faster, that means more of your guys live, and so you're going to try to do everything under your power to scare the hell out of them. And so the Janissaries use music to do that. They had specific martial tunes, martial songs that they would play up, and the second that the drums and the gongs and everything start going off, the enemy knows they're facing the Janissaries, and they've hyped up their reputation to such a degree that the other guys are just like, nah, I'm not fighting. Another great example of this is pirate flags. Have you guys actually looked at pirate flags and seen what's on them? Let's do a quick Google search here, because this is a kind of valuable point in the psychological warfare. I wish it wouldn't do that. Oh well. All right, so let me pop up the old Google and do pirate flag. Images. All right. So here's just a few. Most of these are fake, not real ones, but there's a few here. So why the skull and crossbones? What's the purpose? What are they trying to say by flying skull and crossbones flag? What does skull and crossbones mean in every other use that we can put in use? Death is what it means, right? I mean, think about it. You see a bottle underneath the sink, it's got skull and crossbones on it, you go, what? Probably shouldn't, make a refreshing beverage, It's probably not very healthy for you. So that's the universal side of death. You don't even have to speak the same language and know, these guys mean business. There's also universal symbols that we use to correspond to certain things. For instance, what's that? Any ideas what that might be? I wish I could circle. My thing's not working right now. Actually, that's an hourglass. Hourglass represents time, as in your time is running out. Hearts. What do hearts represent in our culture? Think about we get to February, you start seeing these hearts everywhere, right? Or specifically emotions. It can really be any, but usually we're talking about love, right? So to say we're going to love you. Often a heart is shown as a symbol of compassion. For instance, you might hear someone who donates a lot of money to cancer research, but they have a big heart. You know what I'm saying? Well, showing a heart doesn't mean that they've got compassion. It actually means the opposite. In fact, some even go farther than this and will show the devil stabbing a heart, or things like that, showing that we have no compassion. So what's the point of the pirate flag? Is to cause fear. Basically, if you have another ship, if you're sailing on a ship, right, you're going along, and another ship starts coming at you, right? The flags are the only way to communicate at a distance. Flags could be sent up that have different code combinations, so you can actually send messages, right? This is only one message. Resist and die. So by flying that pirate flag, what they're saying is, if you resist us, it's going to be the end for you. And so certain pirates, their flags would gain notoriety. So that if you saw a specific flag, you go, oh my gosh, that's the flag of Calico Jack Rocco. Or that's the flag of Edwin Teach Blackbeard. So on and so forth. So the fear would work for you, because I mean, if you think about it, these sailors, as the pirates are showing up, they're like, I'm not dying for this cargo. It's not worth my life. I don't own any of this. Why should I fight and die for somebody else's property? No, I'm not doing it. So they surrendered. Same thing worked to the benefit of the Janissaries in a lot of their battles. They would start banging their gongs and everything. Music would send out a cacophony of noise, and people would just be like, nope, I'm out, and just run away. Because they didn't want to face the Janissaries. So that's just kind of a neat thing that we talked about. And again, it works in a lot of different instances. We even use psychological warfare today. For instance, in some of the battles in Iraq and Afghanistan, one of the things that we did is we rigged giant speakers to tanks that would blare like Megadeth and Metallica music, which seems like really kind of silly. But the thing is, in that culture, they never heard anything like it. They don't speak English. And so this very loud, aggressive, thundering music would freak people out. Another thing that we like to do is we use these jets that will fly really low over people. If you remember, like, if you live anywhere near where they do stuff for like Thunder Louisville the air show, you get to test how loud jets really are. I mean, they are freaking loud. My in-laws live by this area where they tend to do practice before the big show, and they're not flying that low, and it's loud enough to rattle the windows. So if they got really low to the ground, you're going to cause people to like have some fear and injuries and stuff like that. It's all about psychology. You just make them say, no, not worth the fight. So under Shah Abbas, the Safavid dynasty, other than its golden age, he did a lot of things to try to make life better for the common person. So one of the things he did is he punished corruption. How did he do it? He executed people. If he found you were embezzling money, executed. Problem solved. It's pretty harsh treatment for sure, but it has the desired effect that people are going to be a lot more honest. And one thing you have to understand about a bureaucracy is that the more levels you put into it, and the more corruption you have in it, the bigger the problem goes, the least it works. One of the things you have to realize, first of all, you guys know what that word bureaucracy means. So, bureaucracy is how you manage big systems. Bureaucracy is basically where you take a big task and divide it into little parts. So, for instance, running a club at presentation. Who runs a club at presentation? Who's in charge? Anybody in any clubs at presentation? Nobody. None of you are in a club at presentation. Wow. That's amazing. Okay. So who's in charge? Not like the individual, but what office? Maybe. But don't they usually have a student representative who's sort of like the person who actually runs everything? The principal, the president? And then they might have someone under them who's a vice president. And then maybe they have someone who handles all the money in case the club wants to do something special, so they have a treasurer. And then maybe they have somebody who handles all the photography for it. That's a bureaucracy, which is a very small one. And the bigger you make a bureaucracy, the more difficult things are to get done, because it has to pass through multiple approvals to get done. Think of it this way. You want to set up a club presentation. You go to Ms. Line and say, I want to set this club. Is that cool? She says yes, problem solved. Yeah? That's easy peasy. But what if instead you had to take it to the front office to get a form that you had to fill out, seeking approval to establish a presentation academy? Then you had to have 2 people sign that to make certain that you weren't just setting the book for no reason. Then you turn in that paperwork and it goes to Ms. Hartman, and then has to look for it and has to set up a meeting with you and Ms. Wine to approve your idea. But you have to do that twice because the first meeting is more just to pitch your idea. The second time maybe to have some questions. So then once you get through all that, you get approval and you get to have your book. You see how the second one takes a lot more time? Bureaucracies tend to make things a little more complicated. Now the reason for that though is that with big organizations, everybody can't handle everything else. You need these levels in order for things to be done correctly. But if one person doesn't do their job or doesn't do it well, it can echo down to everybody else and cause a sort of domino effect of incompetence. So, bureaucracies sometimes need to be cleaned out. That's the objective, actually, of the Constitution. Because we elect people every 4 years, or 8 years, in this case, maybe 6 years. And put in new blood, so hopefully the whole thing gets shaken up and starts working properly. That's the objective of the system. Back in these days, you didn't always have that. So every now and again, you had a king come in and start matching things up. So instead of having a corrupt system, he establishes a meritocracy. A meritocracy is a system based upon merits, or one's own merit, one's own good. So in other words, the person who is best suited for a job gets the job. Regardless of your place in society, regardless of your wealth, whoever is best suited at it will get the job. Now let me ask you a question. Is the United States of America a meritocracy? What do you think? Is the best person always get the job? Why not? Who gets the job? Who's in charge? If it's not the best person, then what determines that? Well, you do, sure. I mean, you guys vote, but how do you know who to vote for? I mean, if I was going to say we're going to have class elections right now for class president, how are you going to know who should be president? Probably vote for your friend, sure, yeah? Is your friend always the best person for the job? You have to do it anyways, right? So that's one form of corruption. What else? What else can make us determine that someone else is going to vote for? How does candidates like actually want to go out to people and like, how do we know about what they do? Yeah, right? How do you get commercials on TV? Right? Are they cheap? So that means that only wealthy can do it, yes? So basically, you want to be president of the United States? Anyone can do it, sure, but you got to be wealthy. You got to have friends in high places. Yeah? Does that mean that the best person for the job? Probably not. So we're not a meritocracy. But ostensibly we are, because technically anyone can do it, yeah? And what's stopping Joe Schmo from his work saying, I've got a really great idea and I'm going to run for president, and just through their great ideas they become president of the United States? Is that technically possible? Yes, it is. It's technically possible, but so is the possibility that a star falls out of space right now and destroys the Earth. It's just really unlikely. Yes? So, are we a meritocracy? Technically, yes, but do we function as one? Not really. But I want to point out now that it did. It's all I good to see on the page that, oh, they had a meritocracy. That must have been, it was perfect there all the time. And then when it shot applause, it was a lot better because a lot of these people who engage in corrupt activities would be a little bit reticent to do so because if they got caught, they could be executed. So corruption was at an all-time low under him. But after him, it gets worse. We have instances like we just talked about. Interestingly enough, another thing he does is he encourages Christians to settle his empire. He promotes tolerance. He's not interested in fueling religious wars. Now, why this is fundamentally a good thing? Okay, let's not even talk about morality. Let's drop morality. Let's be Machiavellian for a second and say, why is it still a good idea to be nice to people of other religions, accept them into your empire? Because people from other places have other experiences, yes? and you can benefit from those experiences as a country. If you promote tolerance, people who are coming from countries that don't have it will settle in your country and maybe bring with them skills and abilities that those other countries no longer have. It gives you an advantage over your nearest enemies, so to speak, or just other countries in general. It pays physically and money to be nice to people of other religions. That's going even beyond just the morality of it. So countries that get too caught up in this religious us versus them mentality tend to suffer for it. Spain is going to be another example of this. So by promoting tolerance, the Safavid Empire actually ends up growing because of it. It does pretty well. Understanding also that this is right smack dab along the Silk Road, where religion has been spreading for centuries. That's how Buddhism spread throughout the world. That's how Hinduism got around. That's how Christianity got around. The Silk Road is going to have a major impact, not just in the physical goods moving through it, but in the people as well. So Esfahan, the capital city helped to encourage women of ideas. Essentially, as I said, on the Silk Road, you have people coming from all these different places around the world. Tomorrow, I'm going to have you guys read an excerpt from a book called Life Along the Silk Road. That tells you what life is like along the Silk Road. And give an idea of what we're talking about here. It's one of those primary source documents. But the other thing is, Central Asian culture kind of becomes centered around Esfahan. This glorious city where people are bringing their cultures and their stories and blending them into new ones. This is around the time that 1001 Arabian Nights started getting widespread usage and widespread singing around this area of the world. But it's also going to have some pretty big impacts on Europe as well. Now, one other thing to point out about the Battle of Chaldiran is that it's going to establish the modern border between Iran and Iraq. Iraq was Sunni. Iran, as you know, was Shiite. And there was a lot of religious tension along the border. And so when the Ottomans came and set up the border, this is where we're cutting it off. This is Iraq, this is Iran, done. And this is the border to this day. So the Battle of Chaldiran not only makes the Safavids pledge fealty to the Ottomans, but it also establishes a border. So I would absolutely know about the Battle of Chaldiran if I were you. Lastly, a lot of Arab and Persian cultural elements can get spread into Europe. For instance, one of the things that's going to become a really big deal in the next few hundred years is coffee. How do you guys like coffee? How much do you drink in a day, do you think? How do you guys drink 1 cup of coffee a day? Drink less than 1 cup of coffee a day. 2 cups of coffee a day. Fair enough. Any ideas on how much the average American drinks? I believe it's around 2 to 4 on average. What is it about coffee that we love so very, very much? Now, right? Caffeine is let's say it's a drug that most of us are addicted to in one form or another. But Mr. Mudd, it's totally not bad for you. It actually is good for you. It actually raises blood flow into the brain and other areas, keeps us productive, and you would be right. Except for the fact that it can also kill you. How many guys know you can buy pure caffeine on Amazon? You absolutely can. You'll buy pure caffeine. Comes in a little tub of powder. Why would you do this, you might be asking yourself? Well, so you can make up your own energy drinks like Red Bull and things like that. Until some wise guy decides to be really funny to take a teaspoon and eat it, and it kills them. True story, bro. There's a lot of stuff that we can consume that is a poison. Nicotine is another one. That's a drug that people use to ingest through tobacco products. You can actually get nicotine in a spray form and spray it on a bug and it kills them. It's an insect repellent. That's one of the things to understand. Drugs are poisons. And the reason that they make us feel funky is because they're trying to kill us, essentially. That is a gross oversimplification. Someone's going to be listening to this YouTube video and go, I can't believe he's saying that. That's wrong. That's bad science. And you're kind of right. But it's an over-exaggeration, something that is still nonetheless a poignant point, I think. And that is that these things, despite what we label as drugs, are still bad for us. You know, now, within reason, they can still have a benefit. I mean, let's face it, coffee is great. Historically speaking, coffee is responsible for the Enlightenment. We haven't talked about it yet, but we will. It's this period of time where we have the birth of scientific reasoning. And yet, nevertheless, we have to understand that it's not all perfectly good for us. Here in a second, I'm going to show you guys a video about coffee. And it's going to kind of throw some of this stuff down, just give you kind of a brief rundown of what coffee is and all this stuff. But first, let's look at tea. How do you guys like tea? What's your favorite kind of tea? Sweet tea. Right? How do you guys like sweet tea? That is such a southern thing. Sweet tea. It's hilarious to me because if you go to other places around like the country, they either can't stand the taste of it or they don't know what it is. Like me, like Lipton, kind of. Those tea drinks. It's a regional southern thing. But there's other kinds of teas as well. I mean, you start getting into the whole tea rabbit hole, it gets pretty intense. One of these days, I'll bring in my teaspoon. You guys can all be like, ooh, there's a little spoon that you put tea in, and it's loose-leaf, and you can get tea in your cup. It's amazing. There's all kinds of great teas out there. I think most of us are kind of familiar with, like, sort of like calling it the bitter teas. You know, essentially lifted in a box. And you drink that, and you're kind of like, oh, this is gross, why do I drink this? The thing is, there's all kinds of sweet teas as well that are naturally sweet, herbs, things like that. There's a whole world of teas out there. And the world is enamored with it. If you think about it, the world consumes more tea than any other beverage on earth. And it has been intimately spread across European culture because of it. Big help. Think about England. Tea time, yes? Among other things. But something else that's maybe less known, but also kind of important, is rugs. How do you guys have any rugs in your house? How do you guys have carpet in your house? You guys know that carpet is a rug that's nailed down, right? You do now. Why do we use rugs? What's the point? Why do we use carpet? What's the purpose? Right? It's also hard and it makes it soft. Yeah? It's just pleasant, yeah? And the thing of it is, I think when we think of carpets, we think of stuff on the ground. But if you think about rugs, go all over the place. Like you can hang those bad boys up, tapestries, things like that. It's art. But it also provides insulation. If you think about most houses, right? Insulation is kind of a big deal, right? Insulation is what keeps it cool and warm, whenever you want to be at that specific time, yeah? And so insulation is kind of a big deal. Otherwise, you just have a draft. This is a way of cutting down insulation, cutting down on the drafts, yeah? While also being a decorative statement. Of course, talk about coffee as well. Okay. I'm going to stop the recording, and I'm going to play this video for you guys about coffee. And hopefully we'll get something out of it. It's pretty neat. I like his videos. It's CP Gray. And